Sri Lanka's most powerful news brand. The people's voice against corruption.
A very good evening. Many members of the United National Party are making statements at present claiming that the United National Party is not involved in the central bank treasury bond scam. However, one question surfaces from amongst the general public. Why are they being so defensive? Why are they saying that they are not involved when there is a lot of incidents to claim that many inside the United National Party are in fact involved? With me today is Faraj Shaukat Ali. Good evening, Faraz.
Evening, Zulfiq. That's absolutely right. If the United National Party and their members are not involved in this, we wonder why they sprang out of nowhere to appoint their own committee when in fact the President was the first to announce that he would form a committee.
You are referring to the Pitipena committee?
That's right. It was 3 members, known loyalists of their party, and acknowledged that they didn't have the necessary expertise to look into such a matter as the bond scam.
Not only the Pitipena committee. You might recall the first probe that investigated this, chaired by D.E.W. Gunasekwa. Before they could even produce their report, Parliament was dissolved. And then the second probe, chaired by Sunil Hanunetti. What happened over there? Now that is where the most interesting incident takes place, which is now referred to as the Footnote incident.
Indeed. The Footnote Club and the Footnoters consisted of all UNP members.
These individuals right here. Let's start off by their names. Harshana Rajakaruna, Hector Apuhami, Abdullah Maroof, Ashok Abe Singha, Ajit P. Pereira, Dr. Harsha De Silva, Vasanta Aluihare, and Sujiva Senasinghe.
And we mustn't forget Sujiva Senasinghe because he turned an author and wrote a book about the bond and made several telephone calls, 223 of them, and a substantial amount of those within the time period of COPE sitting, and later claimed that the calls were made in aid of writing the book. Unfortunately for him, those calls were made about a year earlier.
Indeed, for us. Now, speaking about the matters unearthed by the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, you might recall when former Finance Minister Ravi Karunanayake came before the Commission, how he was grilled by Mr. Dappula de Oliveira, one of the most renowned attorneys at the Attorney General's Department, and thereafter how other witnesses were questioned by the team by the Attorney General's Department, including Mr. Yasanta Kodaguda, Priyantha Nawana, Dr. Avanti Pereira, Mrs. Zaida Bawi, and so on. But when 3 others came before the Commission, that changed.
Absolutely. We had, who do we have? Kabir Hashim
and Malik
Samaravikrama. And we had a situation where it was nothing compared, their cross-examination was minuscule compared to what the former finance minister went through.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't think there was a cross-examination with those 2 ministers because the questions were asked by the commissioners, themselves. And then, for us, we come to the most important person to ever appear at this bond commission. I say important because the incidents surrounding this is also important.
Absolutely.
And that is none other than Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Now, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe was sent his questions by way of a letter, and the questions were sent to him, and the replies were entertained as on the basis of an affidavit. Now, there's nothing wrong in doing that, Zulfiq. The law does provide for that, and the Prime Minister, of course, is hopefully a busy man with a busy schedule. However, it would have been far better for him to claim his innocence by making himself available at the Commission and subject himself to cross-examination just like any other witness.
And for us, speaking of cross-examination, when the Prime Minister came before the Commission, Mr. Dappula de Oliveira was not allowed to ask questions. It was the present Attorney General who asked the questions. Now, for us, on all these incidents that happened at the bond scam and the information that came out at the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, the report by the commissioners clearly states that certain matters need to be investigated thoroughly.
Yes.
And the Attorney General's Department has been vested with a majority of those tasks, and they must, in fact, look into those incidents and produce details and facts to court. Now,
and indeed, Zulfik, and we must bear in mind the former Attorney General and later CJ, Mr. Mompiris, is himself under investigation. So those in authority today must bear in mind that public sentiment is the overriding matter of value. And when public sentiment goes over that value, then action will take place, as indeed the UNP is finding out today, because all their efforts at attempting to derail the process has failed, because the truth will always prevail.
And also for us, we must mention that when you're investigating something, you must follow justice and you must abide by the truth, because for what you do today, you will be held accountable tomorrow, and that is the course of natural justice. Now, speaking of corruption and malpractices on the same point, let's take a step back to the previous regime.
Indeed.
And one important thing that comes to my mind is Sri Lankan Airlines, the national carrier. Look at the state of it for us.
Unfortunately, Sri Lankan Airlines is an absolute shambles. The only time it ever made some form of profit was when it was being managed by Emirates. And even that agreement was cancelled for only God knows for what earthly reason they did that. And the losses has been a tremendous claim on the Treasury.
And the reason identified for those losses is basically, according to well-known sources, is that cronies and relatives were appointed to Sri Lankan Airlines, including the topmost position, the post of chairman.
That's right. And very unfortunately, the chairman who was appointed was actually, he had no expertise whatsoever in running an airline, and he was none other than the brother-in-law of the president of the country, Nishanta Wickremesinghe was his name, and of course his sister was the first lady. Now, that in itself shouldn't be a disqualification. However, the fact is, when you're running something so acutely important as the national airline, and when so much depends on that, because it drives the tourists into our country, we're an island nation and so on, and the attitude with which they ran that airline was flippant at best and completely disgraceful at worst.
And also reports have clearly mentioned that the fall of Sri Lankan Airlines is mainly because of mismanagement, misappropriation, as well as using assets of Sri Lankan Airlines for one's own personal needs. Now, for us, today an important incident took place in court regarding these three men.
That's right.
These three men have been named as suspects by the Criminal Investigations Department, and let's have an in-depth story on that right now.
The people's voice against corruption.